storytelling, right? And we'll talk about, some of the typical pitfalls that I see. So the idea here is that, you want to make sure that you're addressing this to the audience. So when you are presenting, you're not presenting to a data scientist. You're probably going to be presenting to some type of a manager or a decision maker. So you really want to speak to that person. So like any slides or charts that you put in there, you want to think about, well, what would the CEO of the charity be interested in hearing? Like what really turns their crank? And you want to make sure that you talk about things that they care about, right? And make sure that every chart supports your story. And I'll go through some examples here. The general idea here is you want to, frame the problem around, have a very clear statement in your opening slide around, what is the managerial or the business problem that we're looking at, and right away you want to get to, what did we find out? So what were some of the things that we believe can drive more ROI? So like getting to the point. So even before you've done like, here's my model, here's my data, here's my p-values, here's my decile chart. It's like, just tell me what you found and what I can do with it. And then you can go through the process of how you got there, and then you could start to build up your argument, right? Some of the do's and the don'ts, and like a lot of people love to do the don'ts. So you really want to start by talking about what objectives are and really anchor the presentation around what it is that you're trying to do. The techniques that you've applied and all of the modeling stuff is really secondary, right? You can talk a little bit about the data sources, maybe like one slide on that. And then you want to sort of get into some visualizations around, based on the outputs of your models, what were some of the key profiling variables that were driving response. And, you can basically take output from your model and try to create, some simple bar charts that show the strength of that correlation. So if you see that gender is a factor in donations, have a bar chart that looks at average donation by gender, and then you could see between the two genders that the averages are significantly different. If that's something that comes out of your model that is very significant, it's better to show something like that visually than to just show them your model output, right? And again, the drivers of the model and all that stuff, what you really want to do is you want to take all of the information that comes out of all these reports and create simple visualizations that can illustrate, what those correlations are. So there's no need to, show them scatter plot after scatter plot. If you can dumb it down to show a much clearer relationship, that's better. So I'll kind of skip this example, but here are some things that you don't want to do in your presentation. You don't want to sort of say, here's the model as an equation and then throwing in all your R-squared, because like something like this to me is not a result. Like that's really what modelers do. But when you're talking to a sponsor, they assume that you've done this all correctly and that your R-squared is good and that your significance is good. They need to see it more in the form of an answer. So, don't put outputs of your SAS EM diagnostics into presentations like that, or these complex plots, right? So
Allan,
yes.
Can I just interject?
Yeah.
This chart is very, very true. I know I teach data science and data mining at a number of institutions here in Toronto, and when we do case studies, I don't know how many students take the results that they get from EM or whatever tool they're using, and they just import it directly into the presentation. And you have to, me, I'm a data scientist, like I have to look at it and try and understand what it's telling me. And I'm probably more patient than a business guy. Like you can't, like to Allan's point, like it has to be very clear on what the chart is saying. So the chart is saying this, and there should be a very clear narrative. something like this, which is coming from some software that that somebody's used, is going to be is not easily discernible to the eye
Right.
on first glance.
Yeah. So, suggestions of good practices is like, tell them what you're going to say. So get right to the punchline in terms of, in your opening slide, what we looked at, what the problem was, what the key recommendations are, and then you want to sort of go back and then build on that. So, talking a bit about the background, the presenting problem, the background in terms of the donations, the specific business objectives of what you're modeling. So what is it that we're predicting? Why is that important? What's the benefit? Like, how are we going to use it? And then you can sort of go into the structure of how you did it and the findings and the recommendations. I don't know if I want to go through all of this, but there's definitely some interesting slides in here. Let me see if I can show you in terms of the graphics. So here's an example that is, we have a couple of key points and like a chart that simply shows the relationship. I mean, there's some things that can be improved here in terms of the font size, but you want to have a chart and then, in very large font, what are the key things that you want to look at, right? So, here we're looking at, people that are lower ages have higher rates of churn. And then, in the middle age, we can sort of see there is some decline in the churn rate. And then in the higher ages, it appears it's not consistently lower, but we're seeing some sort of pattern in there. So again, that is basically trying to take something from the analytics and actually, in a more visual and graphical way, turn it into a story. So to me, this is a lot more understandable as you're explaining it than looking at a model output that basically has coefficients like this. I mean, there is a story in here, but I can't really tell what it is, right? Yeah. So again, it's like you want to use the modeling output to get the key points, and then you want to turn that into something more visual. And I think I will stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do that. How do you do that?
Same button, I think.
Okay, I gotta find the button. There.
There is a question from Bathuhan in the chat. He's asking, is there any way to see the raw data as rows and columns? He was trying to import